More about you saying it's an interesting novel.
Well, in a way, I'm saying something similar to what you're saying.
I don't think it's interesting.
I kind of knew that that was going to offend some people in the audience, and sometimes I hope it does, because it makes you think about what you're doing, which is, I think it's a novel about our times. Just like you're going to read a historical novel about what was going on in the 1800s. I just finished reading this time travel thing by Time and Again. It's a time travel book about somebody that goes back to the 1800s in New York, and he's a contemporary New Yorker, and he sees it. But, and basically, I think when somebody, in 100 years from now, you know, when people that have learned neurology and genetics and mattering and all of that, look at the DSM, they're going to say, that was really funny what was going on in the 21st century. Look at what they thought. That's what I mean by calling it a cultural novel.
So I think they're going to look back and say, how tragic.
It's tragic that you have to teach it.
It's tragic to the people who get caught in the web of it.
Yes, and they do, and all the programs teach it. And the students have to learn it to pass their exams and so on. And what's a little bit tragic about it is that it's very hard to unsee it once you do. And all I can do is notice myself when I do it, because I'm doing it also. I see sociopathic tendencies, and I'm doing this all the time in my brain. And I just have to say, you see how colonized your brain is.
One comment and then one question.
Sure.
The comment is, you commented about, or made a statement about, that women entering the field has changed or transformed status levels, and that might be a negative. I see that as a positive, because if you shift, let's get more women in more fields, and maybe it'll change more statuses, and then we'll pay more attention to status and have conversations where we can talk about. And then we deal with the power issue that many argue might be at the core of colonization and status, et cetera, et cetera. So my question is, how did you get from a radical feminist to social constructivism?
I think they're the same thing.
You think they're the same thing? Is that what you said?
Yeah. I think they're
and what are they?
They're the same thing about deconstructing what's presented to you as reality and seeing that that's not reality at all. As far as the other thing that you said, what tends to happen when women get into a field is the status of it does tend to get lower. Now maybe there are more conversations about power and so on, but what happens is it starts to pay less, and it starts to be like, some of you remember in the old Soviet Union, all the doctors were women. And what that meant is that the status of a bus driver who was a man was higher and he was paid more. So you have to notice what's happening.
One follow-up, Dave,
sure.
If I might. Are there any radical feminists who are into radical constructivism? And if so, could you give me a name or two?
People that are still doing radical feminism?
I'm sorry?
I'll think about it.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
I think a lot of the most radical work is in feminist critical theory around Judith Butler and people like that. Yeah. She does about the most radical thing that I've seen. But the radical feminists of the early days really have always been social constructionists. And what I usually call the liberal feminists, who is Carol Gilligan and the Stone Center people, and also very focused on interpersonal, on the relationship. And we've had to hassle them for years and years and years for them to even look at the fact that there's a context and there's a culture and there's race, and they tended to be very narrow. They're broadening a little bit now because you have to.
That's a very good question. Why did Judith Butler cut off her breasts?
I didn't know she did.
That's what I heard. That's what the
Butler cut off her breasts?
She's one of the most radical feminists.
I never heard that. I can't tell you. Yeah. Where'd you hear that rumor? Are you just starting it now? I never heard it. I'll check on it now.
It seems to me the boundaries you mentioned that people create about themselves result from the subjectivity, which is the fundamental focus of constructivist psychology. And the question I have is, how can people overcome the limits of that subjectivity to open themselves up and break down the boundaries. I think the boundaries are such a limited factor in our interaction, in our
I agree with you, and I think it's a problem in the field because you hear people talking about boundaries, learn to maintain your boundaries, and it kind of hurts my teeth when people talk that, like somebody does it on the blackboard. Because what they mean when they say maintain your boundaries is make sure that you have self-respect and people respect you, right? People mean something like that when they say boundaries, which is fine, but it comes from a lot of our metaphors and a lot of what we talk about comes from the way our bodies are constructed. Imagine if we had one eye in the back of our heads, how different everything would be, just for example. And so that idea about boundaries is because I think I see where you end and empty space starts. But if we had a different kind of eyes, you would see that that's not empty space and that you're not a solid being. So it's again the practice of noticing. What do we see and what else is there that we can see or that we can't see because we're built the way that we are. We process a bandwidth that's about this wide of what's going on around us.
But that self-respect is protected by the instinct to survive as vigorously as the instinct to survive protects the physical structure of the body, and it leads to argumentation and polarization. That's the fundamental problem that we have, and I think it's so important to get a functional understanding of the mind to appreciate these factors.
Well, what I'm saying is I think that changes, it doesn't stay solid.
Yeah.
Like, just speaking about self-respect, one of the most interesting things I saw was, and I wasn't there, but the Japanese when Fukushima happened. And then something else happened, I think, in the Arab Spring was happening, or something in Greece at the same time. And the Japanese were like standing there. It's a collectivist culture, and they're not supposed to stand out. That's what all of this, you can shape a human being in an enormous variety of ways. And then you see the Arab Spring, Middle Eastern people yelling, screaming, carrying on. The same kind of thing is going on. The Japanese are just like lined up to die or something. I don't know what they were lined up for, but there's a question about how much you have to, how cultural and how personal it is that you have to protect the integrity of your own being. Is your own being really a separate one from mine or from his? See, I'm saying no. American psychotherapy will say yes, you have to sharpen those edges. Know who you are. Find out who it is. Assert yourself to other people. Anybody else wish to speak to me?
So in our program at SUNY New Paltz, we have both a strong constructivist influence in Dr. Raskin and a strong feminist influence in Dr. Melanie Hill and other people.
That's wonderful.
Yes, it is. It's quite nice.
Yeah, very unusual.
So, and we took psychopathology. Well, I took it. He taught it. And we talked a lot about the DSM and kind of, as a practitioner, really navigating through that system of diagnosis when you don't really subscribe to it necessarily. So with the strong emphasis that feminism in particular has on advocacy, I mean, at the risk of sounding naive, for me it just becomes frustrating that we're all saying, oh yeah, we don't really believe in this, but we must work with
but
it.
You have to
it's
diagnose
sort of,
people all day long.
right, it's a foregone conclusion that it's
Yeah.
going to exist in some capacity in one way or another. So my question to you is, how would you sort of advise people to make small changes in their practice that will sort of filter up to the greater systemic problem of that?
That's, you know, that's a tough issue, and in some ways I think that that's one of the ones that has to filter down. Because if you practice and you say, you know, I haven't practiced in a long time, but I had an entire practice of 309/28s when I practiced. And you can't do that anymore, because the insurance company won't pay it. So one of the things, it's an adjustment disorder, the mixed features, 309/28. So one of the things that you have to notice is who's defining what our profession is. And unfortunately, I have to say for that, follow the money. You know? It's not us. And what do? Because if you're a private practice, you're not going to get paid for 309/28 all the time. And I think some of the most effective interventions have happened at the level of the APA and not inside the room. So that's one of the things about doing this kind of work, is there are different ways and different places that you can intervene. Sometimes it's in the room with one person. Therapists don't tend to be, by nature, activists. They want to sit and talk to somebody and not go out into the wider world. But those of you that are, I don't know if you remember, that's how, there were several diagnoses that were going to be in the DSM that were anti-female, and a group got together and lobbied and spoke to the other APA about it. And you know, it just shows what the book is. It's just another way of showing that it's a cultural novel. Is you all know the history of homosexuality. So gay groups got together and lobbied. Sometimes it's not even going to be you. Gay groups got together and lobbied them, and that's how the diagnosis of homosexuality got taken out of the DSM. Now that, I think, is the epitome of democracy, when you vote on diseases. And it's just another way of telling you what it is that we're calling diseases. Imagine if we decided, you know, I don't really care for all the cancer that we have in this society. I think I'll vote against it. It just tells you what the book is. And I think that kind of work, it's better done by committees of the professional organizations who have been fairly effective in doing that, or the consumers that it affects.
That in buying into the power structure in the way, I think I would be more for supporting a grassroots power.